that we'll have together. All right, so this lesson, let's go ahead and get started. I'm already about 5 minutes behind. Long-winded. This lesson, after we were having the lesson last night and this one, I mentioned that sometimes you have, especially I think for I guess everyone, but I know just as women, as wives and mothers and grandmothers and all this, that sometimes it can start feeling overwhelming because you're thinking, at least it's true for me, that you can't ever do all the things you need to do, right? You're just too many things, and they're good things, and you just feel you don't feel like you're enough, and there's not enough of you to go around, and I think it's a very common feeling. So this lesson is balancing a busy life. Because it's busy anyway, but then you start throwing in some of these things we're talking about this weekend, and that's where it can just feel like, I don't know if I can do this. And instead of maybe going on and trying to improve, it's easy, if you're like me, to just feel overwhelmed and then just feel paralyzed and, just do nothing. I'd rather do nothing than mess something up doing the wrong thing. But so that's what this lesson is about. And I've got a lot of things I want to talk about. And so maybe, hopefully, we'll be able to get through all the things I want to talk about. But a lot of times you think about balancing a busy life. I mean, we could talk about, having more order in the home and developing a meal plan and chore charts if you have little kids and older kids. And we could be talking about, things you can do to make life a little bit easier. And those things are valid. It helps, developing a routine or a schedule or budgeting better and all those tips. But those are important, and I think that is important for us all, for families. It will help us be better. But that's the kind of stuff, you can find online, and that appeals to your particular personality more, how you go about doing that. So I'm not really going to talk about that today, even though I think that does help. But the truth is our jobs are so vast and broad, and there's so many things we could be doing. And that's what makes it hard. We have to choose what we can do and how we're going to fit everything in. And so I think we should start before we get into this lesson, because if the one thing I know that I need to do is laid out and clear, then everything else needs to build from that. So I would like for you to turn to Luke chapter 10. And this is a very familiar Bible account of Mary and Martha. But I want us to look at a few things that Jesus taught in this account. I'll read verses 38 through 42. Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. First of all, I can't imagine Martha actually saying that, but she did. I think they were literally really close friends here. She was looking at Jesus as a friend too. But then the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. But, verse 42, this is the key, but one thing is necessary. And I have those words underlined in my Bible. One thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. What is the one thing that's important? If you mark in your Bible, you could draw an arrow up that Mary was at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. Everything else should have come after that. It wasn't that Martha was doing anything really wrong. She was just troubled about something that should have been later, right? That shouldn't have been the priority. And that's the key we have to remember. But it helps me when someone's saying, here's one thing that's necessary, because that's the kind of person I am. My mind will just, I don't know if it's because I'm a dreamer. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but with my personality, I can think and I can plan, I can dream, I can wish and hope, and then I'm overwhelmed because there's so many things that I feel like I should be doing, I want to do, I need to improve this and do that, and then I'm like Martha, being anxious and troubled about many things. But then Jesus here, and that's why I've got the underline, but there's one thing that's necessary. That's pretty blunt, isn't it? One thing. And so what is it? It's listening to Jesus' teaching. So in our lives as women, as wives or mothers or grandmothers, as women in the church, when we have so many things to do, it does help to balance us to know there's one thing we should be concerned with that's necessary. There are many things, only one's necessary. I wrote a blog post years ago. I don't write much on our blog, but this one I did because I just had this idea, and it was from this verse, and I kept thinking, how many parents we just, we want to give our kids so much, even if it's good stuff. We want them to do this, we want them to do that, we want them to be well-rounded, I thought when I was writing that, how many parents try to give their kids the world, but nothing else. And that seems like a contradictory statement, right? We give them the world, but that's nothing. It's nothing for us to give our kids the world. The world's going to vanish one day. It's going to be gone. And all those things that we can work so hard for in our life and take so much time with, so much money with, none of it will matter in the end. The one thing that will matter is your kids learning about God, knowing His teachings, knowing the Bible, and having a sound spiritual life. Those are the things that are going to last. And so I'm telling you, the devil can get in our ears and he can make us worry about all these other things and be troubled and anxious like Martha about them. But in the end, we need to know that we need to focus on that one thing. And so this lesson is kind of built along those ideas of how we do that exactly. So we want to have amazing families, and we want to start there. That's where we start. But there's some things we should think about as we go through this idea, because it's easy for me to say, focus on the main thing, but we all know there's more to life. I mean, I could be snarky. Somebody can be and say, well, you can't just sit around and reading your Bible all day long, right? And even if you did that, that's still not right, is it? You should go out and do things. So how do you balance that? How do you think through all of that? And so one thing is, to me, having this idea of perspective. And we're gonna talk about these 2 or 3 main points. And one is perspective. And that just means you have to take ideas about your season of life. You have to at least acknowledge that there are seasons in life. And we all know that. Your life as a young mother is not going to look the same as someone who has older children like me. Things have changed. The things I do every day have changed. The way I feel about things have changed. And our life in another year is going to look a lot different. It's going to feel different. And in another 2 years, it will be even completely different. And then you start these years of adult children or college, and then once they're married, and all of that starts. So things change, and then you enter into roles that may possibly being a grandmother, and you're trying to help your children, with their children, and stay strong and teach them some of these things along the way too. And so we have to remember where we are in life. I know for a fact, and sometimes it's hard, because we were just having this conversation the other day about a lot of the things we're doing now are centered around kids, not just ours, but in the church. And Adam's not even a youth minister, but it's because we have children. So like we do this teen Bible study in our home. We started this about 3 years ago because we felt like it was important for our kids, and they every other week in our house. People provide the food, but it's still a commitment on our part. And sometimes it's just tiring, and I can be discouraged over it, but deep down I know, like, this is something we need to do. But the reason I'm saying that is because really what I would rather be doing more I'd like to be having maybe more adults in our home, just talking and chatting with them, and getting to know adult members in our congregation a little bit better. And so there's just that little. I feel like things change, but I feel I know deep down we're doing the right thing for what we want for our kids right now. But things will change. We used to be able to invite people over more, and I'd be able to enjoy the little. This is the kind of person I am. Not everyone's this way, but I enjoy like making a meal and making everything nice, cleaning things up, and it makes me feel good. And they're I'm just that kind of person. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Like, oh yeah, oh this was lovely, Leah, and I'm like, oh you're welcome. It just makes me feel good. Like I did something nice for somebody. But now it's like, it's different when there's a bunch of teenagers, it's just different. They don't care about that stuff, so as long as they have a place to sit down and food to eat, that's what they care about. So anyway, things will change though in a few years. And what you have time to do when your kids are little, you might not have time to do when they're older, or vice versa. Sometimes that different things you can't do when they're little, you can do when they're older. But then also when you have little kids, there is time to do some things that as they get older you can't do anymore. So enjoy the season, acknowledge it and enjoy it, and roll with it, whichever way. But use that season to benefit your family spiritually, is what I'm trying to say. And don't compare seasons. That gets us discouraged. Don't spend too much time thinking, I wish that my kids were little and I didn't want to wring their necks every single day of their life anymore. Or I wish that one day when, like this woman who has spotless floors possibly, and now we can get into that where we're comparing and we feel bad, and that's something that's really easy at least for me to do. So let's not do that. And every season, we know the analogy of the body in the church in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, but that can be true in seasons too. Like each season can be important to the church that you're in. A young family with children can be very important to the church to encourage other young families, or to attract young families to come to church and to try out this, religion thing, or maybe we need to do something in church, and you can play a part with that. You can play a part if you're an older family, helping and encouraging and teaching and training, and you can. There's so many different ways you can be involved and help the church with whatever season you're in. So that's why it's important not to really compare them, but just to use them. All right. So I like to think too about all the work, the day in and day out of your family life being like a tapestry. Have you ever seen a beautiful tapestry? And then if you flipped it over, what would it look like? They're not very pretty, are they? It's just a mess. That's what the day-to-day living in a family is like. It's the back of the tapestry. It's just the mess. You don't see any real production, right? It may be the seasons are jumbled up. Like when we're in a particular season, we can't see the finished product. We can't see how those years are going to affect the later years, and we can't for sure sometimes see the day to day. But the thing about families is that at the end of the day, when we turn that tapestry over, we will be able to see that product, and it can be beautiful. And the thing we have to remember is that if you have that kind of perspective, that every day is building your family, I think it helps us make better decisions. And that helps us be able to balance everything, because there again, we go back to choosing the necessary things. And we have to understand that all of those little threads have painted this picture. So what threads are you using? What's your picture? What could it look like in the end? And very often that's going to be dependent on what you've done day to day, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. And so the next thing, so that's about just looking in the perspective that we look at. But let's talk about purpose and priorities here. A little bit last night, the lesson was things I want my children to know. And I talked about, maybe this idea of being intentional. Like we can't just wake up one day when they're young adults and think, oh, they know everything they're supposed to know now. they're that kind of person, you know, the one that's doing really fine. They're faithful. They have a servant's heart. You know, and it just happened. But that's not real life. It's not just going to happen. And so we have to work and teach and train, and things will come together, but only if we are working that every day. And we have to be knowing what our purpose is. What do we want for them? Maybe what we want our tapestry to look like, you know. And so how do we do that? And I think a lot of times we know what we want. And the real truth is, the scary truth is, that every day we're living out that purpose. We know what we want our family's purpose to be. Now, these are some hard truths, but I'm just going to say, like, maybe if we were very honest, we would be saying, I want my kids to be popular, and that's what I work toward. Or we might be saying, I want athletic kids, and that's what I'm working toward. If we're honest, maybe we want them to be talented in some, maybe musical, or, you know, in plays, and we just want them to be a star a little bit and be talented. Maybe we just want them to be smart, learn a lot, do well in school, and maybe we want them to just be good. Just don't get into trouble, right? Good kids. That's what I want. That's what I care about. And then I would like to know that we would have a purpose, though, of wanting faithful kids. That we want them not just to be good, but faithful. And here's the thing, you work all along the way, all the days, all the weeks, all the years, to a purpose, one way or the other. And usually it's your activities and the time you spend. If you sit back and take a good look at it, is a good indication of what you really are wanting for your family. And you have to be honest with yourself and say, why am I wanting this? What is it that's appealing about that? And so, you know, most people in the church would say that they're raising children who love and obey God, that's more important than anything else. But then their daily choices don't reflect it. And that's something we need to really confront with our families. And so here's what I mean. Like, most parents, they'll say, I want my children to remain faithful to the church. That's so important. But then day to day, they allow their family schedule to be controlled by almost everything else besides the church. And that's not the way you get to having children who are faithful to God and the church. It's not by letting everything else come in front of the church. That's not how you're going to get there. A lot of parents will say, I want my children to know about God. That is so important. I want them to know about God. But then they don't give Bible study the attention that it needs. I mean, my toes are sore too, I'm just telling you. So they don't, everything else is on the back burner because we've got to get this other stuff done. They'll say, I want my children to have good morals and be pure. I want them, but then really they're not doing anything day to day to help their kids learn about purity. They're not enforcing rules in the family or monitoring the kids' relationships or, you know, screen times and all of that stuff. And that doesn't really come into play with day-to-day life. We can't just say we want something. We can wish it, but wishes, they're not going to get us there, right? Lots of prayer and dedicated time and dedicated decisions will make those things happen for us if we choose that every day. And I want you, this is a beautiful quote when we are trying to make these decisions here. This is from The Duties of Parents, written by J.C. Ryle, R-Y-L-E. I think that, if I'm reading my writing right. But it's beautiful. It says this: train with this thought continually before your eyes. The soul of your child is the first thing to be considered. In every step that you take about them, in every plan and scheme and arrangement that concerns them, do not leave out this mighty question: how will this affect their souls? If we're wanting to have faithful children who live eternally with God, that question needs to be asked about everything we do with them, everything we let them do, the time we spend with them day in and day out. It has to be asked. We have to ask that question. Don't, just like the mighty question, how will this affect their souls? Some things won't. but a lot of things will. More things probably than we would like to admit might affect their souls. And so, and one more thing along with this is just to not be short-sighted. It's real easy to do that when you have little kids. Like, you've got time. They're little, and then all of a sudden they're grown, and time just went, just like that, right? So don't be short-sighted, and I mean this. Instead of seeing your 8-year-old boy who is finally making a mark on the team, and he's doing really well, and you've supported him, and he's, you don't really need to see him as that 8-year-old boy. As hard as it is, you really need to be trying to see him as that 16-year-old boy who doesn't want anything to do with church because of all these years of the team being his thing. And he just can't be pulled away from it. Even when you know deep down he needs to be learning some self-sacrifice and discipline and faithfulness to God, and that's just what his main concern is. And, there's nothing wrong with the sports and the playing on teams and stuff like that, but looking at him through the eyes of being an older kid and what every day is going to accomplish with him helps you know how to handle that team. It helps you be more brave to say, Coach, Wednesday nights is a no deal with us. We're going to just not be able to come. I remember, and it can be done, I remember distinctively walking off the volleyball court because the area tournament every year was on Wednesday night. And I remember my mom being up in the stands. I knew that this was the plan, but about 10 minutes till 7 o'clock, she signaled me somehow, and my coach knew but I remember I had to leave. Like, I had to get her to sub me out. And I remember plenty of times, that was on a big deal, an area tournament, but plenty of times because I had to miss for a church or whatever, that I would have to sit the bench the next game because that was just the rule for the coach. And so it can be done, and I'm still alive. It taught me that it's not always easy. And sometimes you just sit and you feel a little embarrassed. It's okay, I think, for your kids to be embarrassed about having to say no to a secular sporting event, or fill in the blank, the play that the director's saying we've got to do this on this night, and you've got church, and it's okay. It's a good lesson for them. It's good for them to squirm a little bit. I still remember the feeling of having to say, I'm not going to be able to be here, because I knew that would be disappointing to the team, to the coach. But my parents are trying to show me there's something more important than this right here. There's something more important to you and to our family. So I think we should be doing a lot more of that. And if you are seeing your 12-year-old, instead of seeing them as the little person that wants to play video games or watch TV all day long, you might need to see them as the college student who's sitting in this university class with a biology professor who is mocking the idea of a creator. And all of those years, and I told you these are hard truths, but all of those years that could have been spent, with a little extra, like, I want you to read this book, and I know you've got schoolwork. I want you to read this book though, and the gentle teaching and training that could happen all these years. We need to be looking at them as future adults, as people who will have heartaches and trials in their life, and what we can give them to help them get past and deal with heartaches and trials is what I'm getting at. Your 15-year-old girl one day is going to be a 30-year-old mom who might get the news that her child has a brain tumor. I remember my friend Connie who had that news. And what she told me that day was that her sister-in-law came in and she ran right to her and she said, we'll praise God in the good times and we're going to praise God in the bad times. And she said, I needed to hear that because that's hard. There's hard news, and you don't want your child to lose their faith so when we see them as somebody who might need this spiritual training, the spiritual nourishment that we've been talking about, then that's what we need to be about. In our families, it's the necessary thing. They're going to be a soul judged one day, living in heaven or hell. We have to make sure what we do first is that. And so I want you to remember that. Now, here's the thing that I like to talk about. There's two pictures I wanted to talk about before we end, and one of them is the timeline. Okay, the timeline. of how to get your all the stuff in. And this is a Dave Ramsey thing. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but we've listened to him. We used to more years ago. And he said, I remember so many conversations he had with people. People would be calling in. They were overwhelmed with debt. So I want you to, we're using this as an analogy for time. Okay, so this is where I'm going with it. But they would be overwhelmed with their debt. And one of the first things, he gets information about how much they make, what their maybe rent is or mortgage, and he gets some basic facts. But the reason he does that is he says, I don't know how many times I've heard him say this. He said, well, here, the main thing is you've got enough money to keep your house, make your rent, whatever, and keep the lights on. And he wanted them to know that's your main goal right now. You have a home, you keep the lights on, you feed your family. And he said doing that automatically makes someone, okay, they at least have the main things done, right? We're focusing on the main things. And then he talked them through all of the extra payments, the debt payments, but the main bills, he assured them, you have money to pay for that. Because see, what happens is that sometimes we get overwhelmed with those extras, and we need to sit back and say, we've got the time for the main thing. We do. We have time for the main thing. And it's the little things that cause us the grief and the anxiety about fitting it in. So I'm telling you, think about this. And then another thing he would tell them to do, he said, now those things that are after the main thing, the food, the rent, the bill, the light bill and water bill and all of that, the main thing after that is to lay out the next things you're going to do. And then you have this line, because the thing is, we all have the same amount of time. Just like someone who has, it's a finite amount of time, just like someone might have a finite amount of money, right? They only have so much coming in. So he says, you draw the line where the money ends. You can't pay more than you're making. And you just have to accept that and work with that. Choose what is ahead of that line wisely, and then everything else, you just do it when you can, or you sell the stuff or whatever. And that just, if you've heard him, this is probably familiar to you. But I like to look at our time as that way too. We have time for the main thing. We need to draw the line, and there's only so many hours in the day, but we have to get the main thing in first. Everything else has to be fit in there or cut off, because we can't fit. It's like just in the same way. It's not good for a family to be trying to pay debts on cars and second mortgages or credit card bills, and then they don't have enough money to pay their rent. That's backwards, isn't it? Same thing with us. If it's not right, and it's just backwards for us to be trying to fit in the sports and the school stuff and all of the extracurriculars, and then come back and say, but I didn't have time to teach my kids about God. How backwards is that? It's wrong, is what it is, and we can't do that. We have to put the God thing, the main thing first. Everything else comes after that, and it will be okay, and that's actually what's good for our family. Now, the other thing I want us to look at here is this idea of balance, the true balance. Imagine I feel like when I'm talking about this, I'll probably be doing this the entire time because that's how my mind is working right now. But I want us to turn to Leviticus chapter 19 to get this idea here. It's just one more picture that might help us. Leviticus 19, verse 30, we'll read verses 36 and 37. And this is, of course, a law, a command, God's law about just common everyday living. But in verse 36, chapter 19 of Leviticus, it says, you shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah and a just hin. And I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And you shall observe all my statutes and all my rules and do them. I am the Lord. But he took this very seriously, God did, about this idea of a just or fair balance and the weights. Because here's the idea. you know, in this agricultural time, this was very common. You bought some kind of food or grain or whatever, and the person, the merchant, uses the balance, like he weighs what you bought, but the literal way he knows what to charge you is how many of the little weights are going on to the other side of that scale, okay? Well, it's easy to fake that. There were some who were cheaters, and they would make what was supposed to be, and I don't have all the right, the ephah and the hin, all that, the amounts. It was supposed to be this much, but he had either made it weighed more or less or whatever, so that it looked like, oh, look, yeah, you owe me this much, when in reality it wouldn't have been that much. So it was not a fair balance. It's not a fair weight. The devil is the author of deception. He's the father of lies. He's going to be really good at us having a picture of the balance, right? And all the things in your life, all the things in your family, and you're trying to do the main thing, and you're trying to keep all this other in. But what's happening is that the devil throws this false weight on there. He's going to say stuff, and when you're trying to balance things like your life with your husband, your life with your kids, he's going to balance that everything has got to be about these kids, and then your husband's over here who, you know, you and both of you are not attending to each other like you ought to, and your marriage is crumbling, and all of a sudden you have a broken marriage because you were putting the weights that were not exactly right and fair on the kids and doing all the things, and you know, he doesn't matter, he's a big guy, he can take care of himself, or we just don't have time for our, they're not guys, for these, our sexual relationships, or we just don't have time. And then all of a sudden the devil's deceived us into thinking this is weighing more over here now. And sometimes it really just doesn't weigh anymore. And sometimes we need to have that fair balance. We could talk about church activities and sports the same way. We've already talked about that a little bit, but the football team will not be there, and this is generally speaking, again, they're not going to be there for your son when he's struggling with sin. The church will be. You see where I'm going? This church, the balance needs to be weighted to the church, not the false weights on all this extracurricular. They're not going to be the most important thing for your family. And then we could say the same thing about the church being important for our health of our families. And the thing you read in Acts chapter 4 about the church and what they did is that they were together a lot, right? They spent time together, and that their purpose is because they were there for each other during times of persecution. It wasn't easy to be a Christian. They were being persecuted, but they still spent time together. They gave each other comfort and encouragement, and that's what we want for our kids. So we have to encourage that to happen by making church be a priority in their lives. And even the little silly church events can be a way to do that, because we need to spend our time with our church family and make that be a priority. Not that you can't do other stuff, but that needs to be the priority. We could talk about the same thing, balancing the family time and the social time. We can run around like crazy doing things for our kids, but we're not really spending time with our kids. We need that time in the living room and around the table to be teaching and for them to be seeing us live out the Christian life. We can spend a lot of excess time running around thinking we're being a strong family because we do all this stuff. We're not doing it together, though, sometimes. It's not the same. And so we need to make sure you can do this. Traditions, family traditions and rituals are just so important, and they don't need to be sacrificed because that devil is throwing a big old weight about how your kids need to be well-rounded and they need this and they need that. We need to be saying the fair weight should be on this family time and the church time and all of that. And everything else, remember, going back to the timeline, it just has to come out. The thing Dave Ramsey told that guy was, you just have to call, and when they call collecting, you have to say, I'm sorry, man, but this month you're just behind the line. And he said, the man's like, what in the world? He goes, and he tried to explain, no, you're behind the line. Like, I paid somebody else this month, and if you didn't make the cut. So we can say that. Sometimes we just have to say, it's just not gonna make the cut. You know, this activity, we just can't do it. We can't do it, we're not gonna do it. Because maybe we can't, we need to acknowledge that we can't, but, I think that is everything I was wanting to say. I really enjoyed these lessons. I hope that it's been some encouragement and spur you on a little bit in this business of raising families and being a good wife and mother, and just doing our part to train our families the best that we can. It's been good to talk to you all.